All right. Our next section in the circulatory system is what is in the blood? What is blood made out of? Blood has basically, well, there's like two, we can categorize that in two components. There's the liquidy part, that's plasma, and then there's the cellular part, the cells. And there's three types of cells that you will find in your blood. Let's talk about the liquidy part. The liquidy part makes up like 55% of blood is plasma, and it's mostly water. This is mostly water, and in this water is where things are dissolved. There are things that are dissolved in it. So there are blood proteins dissolved in this water, and these blood proteins, they do a bunch of things. Blood proteins are called globulins. So these are globulins. And there are immunoglobulins. So these are proteins that have to do with the immune system. Antibodies are proteins that are immunoglobulins. You may have heard of antibodies. Everybody's getting vaccines to create antibodies, which are important part of your immune system, which we'll talk about when we deal with immunity. And there are also globulins that have to maintain blood pressure, have to deal with maintaining blood pressure. An example, one of these is called albumin. And basically what they do is they are dissolved in the blood and they keep the blood hypertonic. And as a result, because the blood is hypertonic, water wants to go into the blood. There is a gradient, an osmotic gradient, into the blood from the extracellular fluid, depending on what's going on in the extracellular fluid. And there are proteins involved in blood clotting. So globulins involved in blood clotting. So those are dissolved in plasma. There are also ions dissolved in the plasma, salt ions. And there are biomolecules are also dissolved. So nucleic acids, nucleotides, amino acids, carbohydrates. These things are going to be dissolved in the blood, traveling through the blood, going to where they need to go. And hormones. The other thing that you will find in the plasma are dissolved hormones. Of course, hormones go to target tissues and activate parts of DNA. We saw that in the digestive, in the digestion. Gastrin was one of these hormones that goes to cells in the stomach and causes the stomach to produce the gastric juice and secrete gastric juice into the stomach. So that's what's happening in plasma. And the other, so the job of plasma is to carry all those things. The other thing that plasma does is because plasma is made out of water, water has a high heat capacity. So we talked about the homeostasis. So this is where temperature, where heat is contained inside plasma. And you know, when we move blood to the surface of the skin, we can have that heat exchange to cool blood. So plasma is important in homeostasis, in maintaining temperature and maintaining homeostasis of the body. There are also, like I said, ions are dissolved in there. So there's pH, is bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions dissolved in the plasma, maintaining pH. So that's the liquidy part of the blood is plasma. So homeostasis, basically carrying dissolved stuff. And then we have the cellular part. We have the cells. The most abundant cells in that you will find in blood are these. These are, of course, the red blood cells. Now, all the cells come from, they basically come from one place. They sort of start off in the bone marrow, and they start from a multipotent hematopoietic stem cell. And basically, chemicals will determine the differentiation, and what you will have ultimately is all the different types of cells, all the different types of cells from that one kind of stem cell in your bone marrow. So you will have you will have platelets, red blood cells are called erythrocytes, and then all the various types of leukocytes of which there are essentially 5 types of leukocytes. There are 5 on here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 types of leukocytes. So let's talk about red blood cells. So red blood cells, what you will notice about red blood cells, maybe we have a better picture here. We go erythrocytes. Let's just look at erythrocytes. They don't have a good image here of an erythrocyte, do we? Well, that's okay. That's okay. We've got a better one. We'll look here. So erythrocytes, they have what's called a biconcave shape. So you can see they're basically like concave mirrors, 2 concave mirrors back to back, sort of a donut, but the hole is in there's no hole. And these are highly specialized cells. They are so specialized that as they develop, they lose their organelles, they lose their genetic material, they lose their nucleus, mitochondria, all of that stuff is gone. They're actually empty on the inside. All they are is basically cell membrane, and their cell membrane is highly specialized. It is saturated with hemoglobin proteins. And hemoglobin, there are also some other enzymes on there, but basically you've got enzymes and proteins on the surface of these red blood cells that are specialized for carrying oxygen. Binding and carrying oxygen. That's what red blood cells are for. As well, they can red blood cells can also bind, the hemoglobin can also bind hydrogen ions, and it can bind carbon dioxide. Not as well as it binds hemoglobin. Not as well as it binds oxygen. So that's what red blood cells do. They're for carrying oxygen. And they have this special shape. That shape basically, it maximizes their surface area. It also lets them get squeezed because remember, capillaries are really, really tiny. Their diameter is only 1 cell thick, and it's actually a little bit less than 1 cell thick in some places. So these guys squish through there, and as they squish, it helps to loosen the the oxygen. It helps the oxygen to be released and diffuse into the tissues. Our next is so we've got erythrocytes, we've got red blood cells. Now, as a result, because they have no nucleus, they have no mitochondria, they can't really, they're not doing all the stuff that cells do, and they're abused. They've squeezed through stuff. They're constantly doing gas exchange. They wear out. They only last about 120 days, so just a few months. And then what happens is they die in the liver. They're broken down in the liver. All their pieces are recycled. The iron that is in them gets turned into bilirubin, biliverdin, some of the pigments in bile. And these make up most of the blood. When you look at a blood smear, which you will be for a lab, when you look at a blood smear, the majority of the cells that you are seeing are red blood cells. No nucleus, no organelles, red blood cells. The next kind of blood cells that are in there, they only make up 4% of the blood, very small amount of the blood, are leukocytes. So erythrocytes are red blood cells. You can remember because they got R in them. Erythrocytes, red blood cells, and leukocytes are white blood cells. And these are part of the immune system. Their job is simply patrolling the blood and carrying out functions of the immune system. So some of these, there are like I said, there's like 5 general kinds. They have a nucleus. Some of them have a double-lobed nucleus. We can look at what they. Here we go. There's a few types of these white blood cells. So you can see they have lobed nucleuses. There's another one with a lobed nucleus. And they break down into phagocytotic cells. So remember, phagocytosis is cell eating. So these are going to be cells that eat invaders. They phagocytose. They do cell-to-cell, basically, mediated immunity. So they come up on a cell and they eat it. So that would be cells like these ones are called neutrophils. eosinophils. What else we got? Monocytes. And then another kind of these cells, there's going to be lymphocytes. They mature in the lymph, which we'll be talking about the lymphatic system. And some of these, I mean, all of these, some of these phagocytoses, some of these also are cytotoxic cells. So what they do is they release toxins that kill or break down invaders. And or they bind to these invaders and they inject them with toxins. And then we have B cells, and these are lymphocytes or B cells. They're smaller cells, and B cells release antibodies. So they do antibody-mediated immunity. So they release antibodies. They also learn the structure of these pathogens. So you've got these various white blood cells that have different functions. We're going to talk about some of these in the immune system section. So white blood cells, phagocytotic, cytotoxic, antibody producing white blood cells. Anything else? And they're going to be functional. They have a nucleus, and they're usually larger. They're much larger than red blood cells. Some of them, the phagocytotic ones especially, are going to be much larger. And then last are thrombocytes, and these are platelets. And how platelets work, if we can go back here to an overview of blood or production. Here we go, production of formed elements. This is the online textbook, if you're wondering what I'm scrolling through here. So if you look at all the differentiation of all the different blood cells, we got erythrocytes here, and then platelets are right there. And basically what happens is there's a precursor to platelets in the bone marrow. These cell is in the bone marrow called a megakaryocyte. And this megakaryocyte breaks apart. And so platelets are sort of these little pieces of cell. They're tiny. They're very small. Platelets are the smallest of all of these. So you got platelets in size, if you're going from platelets to erythrocytes, red blood cells, and then white blood cells. And platelets are involved in blood clotting. It's so you don't bleed out. If you break a vein or break an artery, platelets are what will cause the clot and give time for that vessel to fix itself, to repair itself. How do they work? So what happens is, let's go through the formation of a blood clot. Oh, this looks all weird, kind of weird. Let's see if we can somehow. Let's just restart it. So what happens? This might not be the best. What happens is, so a blood vessel is damaged, so the inside of the blood vessel is hanging in. It's got jagged edges because something, you got poked with a needle or something like that. So blood is flowing past and is flowing out through the break, and then maybe as well, these platelets are flowing past, these little chunks of these little pieces of those larger cells. And as the platelets hit against the jagged parts, against the damaged sections, what will happen is they will become damaged. And when they become damaged, they release an enzyme. And this enzyme is called thromboplastin. Am I right? Am I right in that? Just find where we were. There we go. So, and they become activated, these platelets, essentially. There we go, that's better. So the activated platelet releases thromboplastin. And in the presence of calcium, that's why you have to have calcium in your blood. You've got dissolved ions of calcium. What happens is thromboplastin is an enzyme that catalyzes the reaction of converting a blood protein called prothrombin. This gets kind of kooky. It's good to look at this diagram and to just read it sort of again on your own. So prothrombin is a globulin, so it's just a blood protein that's dissolved in the blood. And thromboplastin is released by these. It's the first step in this metabolic pathway, basically, in this enzyme-mediated pathway. So thromboplastin is released. It's an enzyme, and it converts prothrombin into thrombin. So now thrombin is an activated enzyme. We got another enzyme. It's this multi-step process. And what thrombin does is thrombin catalyzes the conversion of another blood protein, another globulin, called fibrinogen, which is the precursor to fibrin. And so thrombin will change the shape, will convert fibrinogen, and what will happen to fibrinogen is soluble in blood, in water. It's basically soluble. It's hydrophobic, and the arrangement of electrons, the arrangement of amino acids is changed by thrombin, and so fibrinogen becomes fibrin, and fibrin is insoluble in water. It does not dissolve in water, so it'll start to clump together, just like oil, basically, and it'll clump. Fibrin looks like these these hairs. They will start to clump together, form this hairy clump. And red blood cells, as this happens, red blood cells start to get caught up. It's basically like a net is starting to form, and red blood cells get stuck in that net. They get broken, and that creates this plug filled with platelets and red blood cells and this fibrin, which covers that whole plug, and that creates the blood clot that plugs the hole that was created. And now your body can heal over that hole. So when you see a scab on your body, you can actually see all those things are kind of in there. I haven't had a scab in a long time. As you grow old, you become a lot better at preventing yourself from getting injured and cut. You don't move or you don't jump around so much. So there you go. Those are the components of the blood. It's just of note, hemophilia is a condition. It's a genetic condition, an inherited genetic condition. So it's a germline condition. What happens in hemophilia, one of these enzymes that are in this process, so either prothrombin, thromboplastin, fibrinogen, is that there's a mutation in the gene that prevents these from working effectively, and it's a very dangerous condition. Again, it's an inherited condition, so like the royal family of England, because of incest, quite a few of them have been, at least in the past, hemophiliacs. And basically what happens in hemophilia is you have trouble forming blood clots, so you continue bleeding. If you get an injury on the inside, somewhere where you don't have pain receptors, you could bleed on the inside and not even know until it's too late. Until the certain part of your cavity is full of blood and you become weak because you've bled into the inside. Okay, there you go. I leave you with that.